Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are around Australia. Welcome to this webinar for ESS BIZGRANTS new members. And today we're going to be looking at Accelerating Commercialisation Grant as a key item within this webinar. I hope you've had a good weekend. And for some of you around Australia, I hope it's not too hot. It's going to be a long, hot summer by the looks. If you have any questions during the webinar, can you please type your questions into your computers and then in webinar jargon, raise your hand and send the questions through to me. And towards the end of the webinar, I will answer the questions to the best of my ability. If I can't give you the full answer at that stage, I will get back to you over the next couple of days. So today we're going to look at Accelerating Commercialisation Grant. This is part of the Entrepreneurs Program, which has had a couple of changes to its name since the current Liberal national government introduced this program just after they were elected. And this program runs a few grants. The Business Growth Grant, which is a grant of up to $20,000 on a 50% basis to literally do any sort of work within a business which will improve the business's performance. Research Connections, which is a grant of up to $50,000 on a 50-50 basis to undertake research projects. And the grant that we're going to concentrate on today, Accelerating Commercialisation. All of these grants are delivered around Australia by case managers who are contracted to Entrepreneurs Program, but they are case managers with different responsibilities. So there's separate people for each of those programs that we've already listed. And the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant, which is what we're operating today, those persons are referred to as commercialisation advisors. Now, these people have all had extensive private enterprise or university research organisation type backgrounds. They are contracted to the government to deliver this program. So they are not bureaucrats as such. They are there to assist in these programs being delivered. So let's look at eligible applicants for Accelerating Commercialisation Grant. Any type of business can apply, a sole trader, a partnership, a trust, but by the time the applicant is ready to enter into an agreement with the Commonwealth, and that's obviously presupposing that they have been approved, then they have to have incorporated a company. So the government will only sign agreements for this grant with companies. They need to have developed a product or process. And they must own or control the intellectual property. And it must be in the name of the company applicant if the intellectual property is owned by the company, or indeed if it's on a license agreement to utilise it. But a license agreement must be basically for at least Australia. It can't be a part of Australia, so it can't be just New South Wales. It has to be for the whole of Australia if they have utilised some intellectual property owned by someone else. And the entity's turnover must be under 20 million, but it can be as low as 0. So a brand new startup can apply for Accelerating Commercialisation. And indeed, a number of the successful applicants have been brand new startups. Now, the grant funding is on a 50% grant basis, and it's up to $1 million. The predecessor to this grant was called Commercialising Australia, Commercialisation Australia, I mean, and it had funding available of up to $2 million. But this funding has now been reduced in this grant to $1 million. And for commercialisation offices, which are all attached to universities, the grants are restricted to an amount of up to $250,000. So for most of you who are working with businesses, and I assume not university spin-offs, the upper grant is $1 million. But there are plenty of grants being issued for amounts over $100,000. So if you have a client who has undertaken the basic process to get a product or process in place, and they need assistance to then commercialize that invention or process, this is the grant for them. Now, it's a two-stage application process. In the first instance, the applicant has to complete an expression of interest. And the second stage is the application when invited to do so. Now, this can be a bit of a trap. You need to have done most of the work to put in an expression of interest, because the expression of interest form requires a lot of information. And therefore, I believe you need to have virtually done the total application in your working paper file before it is submitted as an expression of interest. Firms are charging for this process, and it can vary from a few $1,000s up to around $15,000, depending on the quantum of the grant and also the organisation that's applying. So an organisation that's got a turnover of $18 million, you would expect to have an effective management team in place, probably even got a chief financial officer, and that type of organisation can probably do a lot of the work themselves. If, however, it's a small business, maybe no turnover, or maybe only a few $100,000 turnover, then in most cases, those types of applicants are going to need a lot of assistance to be able to lodge a successful application. The way I'd go about that process is giving a quotation and expecting some payments to be made according to milestones having been achieved. But in the first instance, a 1/3 to 50% upfront payment. It's a 2-year program, so all the work has to be completed in that time. And another very important requirement of this is it's funding through to the first commercial sale. Now, the commercial sale is at the generally accepted price that this product is able to be successfully sold in the commercial marketplace at. So I had experience last year where we had a client that had developed a product that the independent marketing expert was very confident that the product could be sold for around $13,500. The client was anxious to get some money, so they in fact did a deal with some of their potential clients that they would buy a prototype that hadn't been fully proven to enable it to be subjected to some real life experience in those employers' businesses so that some feedback could be attained. Now, for those transactions, the client agreed to sell the prototypes to those potential customers for around $5,000 each. Oz Industry and the Entrepreneurs Program accepted that the $5,000 was not a commercial sale. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, you need to be able to have some independent substantiation that the estimated commercial price is something that is able to be supported. Now, the eligible expenditure on this grant has got some various subheadings. We've got labour expenditure up to an individual maximum of $175,000. Labour on cost of 40%, which is to cover holiday pays and superannuations, etc. You can have contract expenditure. might be contract to other consultants to undertake certain work. Planned expenditure can be approved, and that is primarily the depreciation in the first instance at the tax commissioner's rates. But if an item of planned is basically going to be written off over the 2 years in undertaking the commercialisation process, you could argue that way in your application. Prototype expenditure. If there's subsequent work required on the prototypes, this program will look at paying for that. There's a whole range of items which would fit under the category other expenditure. You can hire an experienced executive as part of this program to a maximum of $250,000 per annum. Many of the applicants that you will come across in accelerating commercialisation might be great inventors or people very good at conceptualizing ideas, but their ability to manage a business can be suspect. Pardon me. And for that reason, the government has included this category of an experienced executive. Now, the application requirement, there is a requirement for an accountant's declaration. That's the accountant that normally acts for this particular business. And that is basically to comment on the applicant's ability to pay their share of the cost, which will be at least 50%, depending on the total expenditure. The Entrepreneurs Program accepts that all of that money will not be available on day one, in most cases, and that the client share of the payment is going to come from sales of other products, some share capital that they hope to raise from various people. It would be best for those discussions to have commenced with people who are potential investors, and for letters to be obtained from those people signifying that they are prepared to invest. Now, their letters could be conditional on the applicant receiving a grant from Accelerating Commercialisation. That is quite normal in this market, that a qualification is submitted, that a particular investor will put in their $50,000, say, as long as the company has been successful in its Accelerating Commercialisation Grant. The application has to be lodged in according to the process timetable that's advised, and there's a project budget that's required, and that is in quarterly segments. Now, all this requires a fair bit of work to make sure that everything has been submitted appropriately. And as you'd expect, the government is looking for strong evidence of fulfillment of the criteria of the program before advancing taxpayers' dollars for this sort of grant program. So that criteria is that there is a need for funding. So if the applicant's balance sheet shows that there's $4 million in a bank account, you would want to have an answer for that and submit that as part of the expression of interest as to why it's unreasonable for the company to utilize that money. It might be reserved for something else. There could be very legitimate reasons why it's not available. What is the market opportunity? What's the support for that market opportunity? Some work is going to have to be done before the expression of interest is lodged, obviously, to identify what the market opportunity is. Where is it? And is there a value proposition? If the client is estimating they can sell something for $13,000, is that what the market's prepared to pay? Or is the market only prepared to pay $1,000, in which case there is not going to be any value proposition able to be advanced. The Entrepreneurs Program is very interested to know what the applicant believes will be the process or the timetable to implement all this and to spend the grant money. So what's the execution plan? How long is it going to take to do the various aspects of the work that have to be undertaken? When will they be completed by? What are the milestones? What's the management capability? This can be one of the big problem areas for people in this grant. It's a lot of money, up to $1 million. Client's got to match that, so we're looking at a $2 million potential spend. Has the clients, the applicant, got the management ability to manage a project of this size? And if not, what are they going to do about it? And that is where hiring some external people, some consultants, can be very important in convincing the application panel that this is a worthy project to be supported. And what are the national benefits out of the government funding this particular application? Is there spin-offs to other businesses? Will there be extra knowledge that's able to be utilized within universities? Now, the government's allocating this particular grant to the programs that have been identified for industries that are referred to as growth sectors or priority sectors by the government. And these include 5 prime areas: advanced manufacturing, food and agribusiness, and this is post the farm gate, medical technologies and pharmaceuticals. But it's technologies, it's not medical practices. Mining equipment technologies and services, and oil, gas and energy resources. Now there's hundreds of business types that fit under those 5 definitions. And then we've got enabling technologies for those 5 major industries supplied by people operating in freight and logistics, infrastructure related construction, information and communication technology, and professional services, but mainly in the scientific area. Now those 9 industry groups represent over 550 different types of businesses when you look at the Australian Taxation Office business codes. In fact, it could be argued that virtually every trade will fit under those definitions of those priority industries. The key thing is to identify if your client can fit under those categories, because they're the only ones that are eligible for this particular grant. Successful applicants must enter into a funding agreement with the Commonwealth, and if you've had any experience with these, you will know that you cannot change anything. You accept the agreement as it is, or you don't get the grant. The payments by the Commonwealth will be made quarterly in advance in accordance with the project budget. So if the budget is for a spend of $1 million, so the grant's $500,000, and you've indicated that in the first quarter you're going to spend $100,000 in total, the government will advance $50,000. And then a report has to be submitted at the end of the quarter which details what the actual spend was. And if the actual spend was only $80,000, that will mean that the grant amount should have only been $40,000, and therefore the amount of funding in the second quarter will be reduced by $10,000. Unless you're able to convince Entrepreneurs Program, or the client is able to convince them, that the shortfall in the first quarter will be made up in the second quarter. And that's how the program is funded. There is a retention amount, throughout the period of 12%. And that is an insurance policy by the government to ensure that at the end of this process, the final reports will be submitted. Taxation treatment's important, especially for these grants that are of a higher amount and grants that require capital expenditure, whether it's on new plant and equipment or even buildings of some sort. Because in accordance with most grants in Australia, the grant income is subject to income tax. Now, normally you're going to have, or your client's going to have, offsetting expenditure against the grant money, so the taxation position is neutral. But if your client has spent a fair bit of money on plant and equipment which has just been depreciated, and on buildings over the 2-year period, then they could in fact have a taxation liability at the end of June each year from the grant. R&D, research and development incentive, and the clawback. Some people ask me questions, can you still undertake research and development when you're receiving an Accelerating Commercialisation Grant? The answer is yes, but obviously the client has to be able to satisfy the requirements of Oz Industry and the Australian Taxation Office that legitimate research and development is still being undertaken. But if that research and development is being undertaken for which a grant amount has been paid, then part of that grant amount will be clawed back by the tax office when the company's tax return is lodged. So you just need to bear that in mind and have a discussion with your client about those potential consequences and obviously calculate what the clawback might be. At the end of the process, a final report has to be submitted, so that could be in 2 years' time or 12 months' time, depending when the project's completed. And it comments about how the project has gone, how the applicant found the experience of dealing with the Entrepreneurs Program, the commercialisation officers, the consultants that are being utilised, and how they found it how it helped them in their own marketplace. There is an audit certificate also required at the end of the project. This is the verification that the government received that the money has been spent in accordance with the program. The maximum sum that is allowed for audit fees is 1% of the project costs. The audit report needs to be completed by an accountant who is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, or the CPAs, and basically requires a certification that the expenditure has been in accordance with the grant program. So that's an overview of the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant. I'm just going to check if there's any questions. I can't see that there's any questions at this stage. If you have any questions on any aspect of Accelerating Commercialisation Grant, because that is our feature grant for today, can you please type in your question and send them through to me. I'm just going to have a brief visit to the ESS BIZGRANTS website, because this is a webinar for new members to see whether there's any questions about any aspect of how the system operates. As you can see, I'm now on the ESS BIZGRANTS website. Within the members home area, there is a summary on the various questions that you are asked relative to an application. If you have any questions or comments about the information contained within this segment, can you please type them in, or you can let us know later on. The business industry code is the Australian Taxation Office Business Industry Code. And I can't readily see any other items that we're particularly looking for comments. So let's just go on and have a look at a client profile. Just bear in mind that in a new client profile, you need to insert the client's name, or you can insert a code reference for that client if you wish. The identification of the applicant is important. Companies can apply for virtually every grant that I can think of that's applicable to small, medium enterprises, whereas some of these other entities can only apply for a few grants. The government definitely has a bias towards companies when it comes to grants. You need to answer questions. Do you export? Someone asked us a question on Friday about intending to export. The system is set up on someone that's planning to export or actually exporting, because you can receive the Export Market Development Grant if your client has spent more than $15,000. If you are planning to export and your client has undertaken various expenditures, but just someone that's thinking about export, other than for the reason of showing them that there is a grant available, I wouldn't answer yes to that, because you're going to give them a false impression that they might be able to claim an Export Market Development Grant at this stage. Do they import? There are a couple of grants that are directly linked to importers, or probably a better description is incentives or benefits that are available to importers, especially if the goods are going to be exported within 12 months. Number of employees is important, because we have tried to gear this to the type of grants that are available, and many of them mention numbers of employees. ABN, if your applicant has not got an ABN, they will not be eligible for any of the grants. How many years have you been operating? This is important because a number of grants these days do specify the number of years that a business has been operating. And we have dissected this into the bands that the government is utilising for years in operating. Turnover has some real variation in the bands, and we've included the ones that are mentioned in the various grants, so that you can just indicate what your client's turnover is. Businesses need to be registered for GST if they are going to be successful, so you need to be answering yes. Are you exempt from tax? If you answer yes for that, you will not be shown any grants, because ESS BIZTOOLS is configured based on grants that are available for small, medium enterprises, all of which theoretically could be paying income tax. Now, are you involved in research and development? That is not a question just targeted at companies. It's at any business, because we've got a yes answer linked to a number of grants, such as Accelerating Commercialisation and a few others that we have assumed in our planning on this site, that if someone was undertaking research and development, that they could be then interested in grants such as Accelerating Commercialisation. They may not have spent $20,000. They may not at this stage be a company, so they mightn't be able to claim the research and development rebate, but they may well have undertaken research and development, which would trigger the ESS BIZGRANTS system, identifying that because of that R&D activity, they may well be eligible to apply for another grant. I still haven't got any questions. Don't forget, if you do have questions, to send them through to us. I'm just going to utilize a couple of the client profiles that we've been utilizing for webinars, primarily now to just go into the I'm just using a site we've been previously using. When you get through to inserting the business industry code, if you know the code, please enter it straight into the system. If you don't, type in a keyword, and the ESS BIZGRANTS will search the ATO database on business names and will come up with names which will assist you. You then click on the search grants and you will receive a pending list. Now, most employers in Australia are able to claim apprenticeship incentives. So they are there, and there's various other payments. This was a New South Wales business. This one we're just showing you at present. So a number of New South Wales grants are appearing. I just want to show you the grant report again. In this particular case, we had identified 4 grants for potentially eligible grants. To get the grant report, you just click on print report, and the report that you're getting is going to have the name of your client on it. Your name, it won't show ESS BIZTOOLS, it'll be your name as the ESS BIZGRANTS member. And we'll have a synopsis on the grants that have been identified that the client might be eligible for, together with details of the funding amount. So this is the report that I suggest that you prepare and have a conversation with your client. Another new subscriber contacted me last week and said, well, when do we do this? Our recommendation is that you prepare the grant report on one of 2 occasions during the year. I think this is a great job that can be done in June, July each year. If someone is not fully occupied within your team, they could start going through your business clients and putting them into ESS BIZGRANTS. But the best way to use the system at this time of the year is as you're completing the financial accounts for the client, that you have one of the team enter the basic details into the client profile. And then someone who knows a bit about the client can answer some of the basic questions, answers the questions, so that you're able to produce this report. So that when the client comes in for their end of financial year review meeting with you, you are able, in a very proactive manner, to be able to submit this report to them and indicate that you have identified that these grants are available for their business. Now, what the client's going to then do is one of 3 things. A very small percentage of clients will probably say they're not interested because they don't really want anything to do with any sort of government agency. That's unfortunate, but it's their decision. Second group, again, very small, will say, okay, thank you very much. We'll take the report and we'll work on that and we'll try to lodge the applications ourselves. The third, and what I believe will be a very large group, probably nearly 85 to 90% of your clients that you've undertaken this process with, will then be saying, well, okay, well, you go ahead and complete the applications for us. At that stage, our recommendation is that you indicate to the client that you're going to be opening a separate work in progress account and that you will be invoicing the client separately. So send them a new engagement letter, because this is brand new work that in all probability you didn't cover in your initial engagement letter with your client at the beginning of the year. Then you're in the situation of being able to assist in preparing the various applications that have been agreed to. ESS BIZGRANTS is giving you a direct link to the webinar site for the various programs where you can access the grant application form. So hopefully that helps you. Another important aspect of all this is that some of the work on grants that accountants who are committed to offering business advisory services should be able to undertake. Within Accelerating Commercialisation, there are a number of work areas that could be undertaken by accountants. The things that I'm referring to are most of those applicants are going to require, as part of that process, budgets, cash flow forecasts, a business plan, a plan for raising capital, an allocation of a value per share to assist in raising capital, probably some training in undertaking investment pitches and in actually negotiating with potential investors to invest in the business, because many of them will need to raise some money. The recording process of accelerating commercialization is a bit challenging, and many of your clients will require some assistance, which is generally called project management. And Entrepreneurs Program's got no objection to a project management cost being included in the approved funding amount. We've done project management assignments costing in the vicinity of $25,000 with no problem from the Entrepreneurs Program organisation. When you look at some of the other grants, we referred to Business Growth Grant earlier. There's $20,000 worth of funding available on a 50% basis. It's a grant that I personally have undertaken budgets, cash flow forecasts, debtors reviews, lean management investigations, human resources, some management mentoring assignments, 6 months of managing or mentoring a management team. All very interesting work, all work that accountants can undertake. So not only are you potentially able to earn some initial fees in undertaking the grant application, you'll then have the potential to earn fees out of undertaking the actual consulting work, for which your client is only going to have to pay 50% of the cost. So I think that's a great way to be getting real benefits for your clients. So that's about it for today, to give you, our members, an overview of the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant and a brief review of the ESS BIZGRANTS website. No one has sent us through any questions. If you think of some questions later on this afternoon, please send me an email with your question, peter@essbiztools.com.au, and we will get an answer back to you. So thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.